This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
Support for this podcast comes from CDTA, The Eagle, a Times Union podcast driven by CDTA. Welcome to your weekly dose of The Eagle, a Times Union podcast. I'm Jessica Marshall. If you're a frequent listener to this show, you may be aware that outside of my work here at the Times Union, I am a competitive figure skater. I've been on the ice since I was 7. I spent my summers training in Lake Placid. I traveled the country and the world for competitions, and I still compete to this day. So, it will come as no surprise to anyone that I've been giddy with excitement over this episode of The Eagle. Our guest today is 1984 Olympic figure skating champion, 4-time world champion, longtime figure skating commentator, and Stars on Ice founder Scott Hamilton. I'm actually myself a competitive figure skater, so any chance to kind of mix my work with my passion for skating is always something that I jump at, so...
That's so cool. That's awesome.
After I calmed down a bit from my childlike excitement at being face-to-face with one of my lifelong skating idols, I've tried to put my serious journalist face on. Scott and I, though, got to talking about a place that we both have a strong connection to. Lake Placid, home of the 1932 and 1980 Olympic Games. Scott competed at the 1980 Olympics. He came in a very respectable 5th place. That was the last time he ever lost a competition, by the way. And he was the Team USA flag bearer at the opening ceremonies. 4 years later, he won the Olympics in Sarajevo. I wonder if you could, wax poetic about your experience and love for Lake Placid. I mean, what does it mean to you that, it's been 45 years since your first Olympics?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been longer than that. When I think back to the first time, I went for a summer competition when I was really young. I think I'd been skating for like almost 4 years. And so I went and competed and of course got beat.
I've gotten beaten there many times myself too.
So yeah, it was really exciting to be there and to be on Olympic ice for the first time. And then we would start to go back. Years later, we would go back for training camps at the end of the summer. And it was perfect weather and it was like a million skaters and it was awesome. It was so much fun. And then the Olympics and, they had the first test event, the Norton skate. And that was the first international win I've ever had. And so I knew I was confident that I had a really good chance of making the Olympic team just based on that event. A few months later, I'm on the Olympic team and just going back to a city that I was very familiar with, but in a very different way.
This year marked the 45th anniversary of the 1980 Olympics, 45 years since the Miracle on Ice. That fateful day when a ragtag group of American college hockey players beat the Soviet powerhouse team.
Up to Schultz, 5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
If you ask me if there's an event in history that I would like to travel back in time to witness, hands down, it would be this hockey game. But lucky Scott, he was in the Herb Brooks Arena at the Olympic Center that day.
I got there late because it was the only night my sponsor and I could have dinner together. So I kept kind of my ticket, and I was still able to get in on my credential. So we had dinner and it was great. And then I ran over and I got there about 2/3 into the second period, and I walked into mayhem. When that goal went in at the end of the second period, it was like the buzz during the ice make was like, can this really happen? I mean, are we really doing this? And I think there was always kind of like, well, don't get your hopes up. So let's just see how it goes, because they just killed us, a few weeks ago. And like all the, it's like, and they're the Soviet machine. Who's going to beat them, right? And so when they came out in the third period and they were short shifting and they were just going crazy. And then Russia pulled their goalie, which was like, I mean, they didn't pull their goalie out of the game, but they switched their goalies thinking that, well, if the Americans are scoring, he's having an off day. It's like, well, it's the best goaltender in the world. It's like, why would you do it? So it was like a perfect storm of everybody kind of working together intentionally and unintentionally to make this happen. And it truly felt miraculous. And then walking out of the arena at the end of that game, I mean, we're all kind of in shock, but I've never seen a display of patriotism like that before. People were singing the national anthem and waving flags, or on top of buildings, and they're just like screaming at the top of their lungs. I've never seen anything like it, ever.
While we were on the topic of the Olympics, I couldn't resist going into a little present-day skating talk with Scott. The World Figure Skating Championships are coming up at the end of March in Boston. The United States is fielding a very competitive team this year, led by reigning world champion Ilya Malinin. He is the first human being to land a quadruple axel in competition. That's 4.5 rotations in the air. And for reference, at the height of our respective competitive careers, Scott and I were only ever able to do triple jumps, which is no small feat, of course. And Scott's triple Lutz goes down in my book as one of the greatest ever. But anyway, Worlds is shaping up to be an exciting event that's going to set the stage for the Winter Olympics next year in Milan. I just wondered if you could talk about the state of skating today. Like, are you looking forward to Worlds? Are you going to go? Are you...
Emotionally, I have to go to Worlds. Yeah, we're going to honor Dick Button at Worlds, and we're doing a breakfast, sort of commemorative sort of breakfast celebration of life for Dick at Worlds, and I get to host that, which is really sweet.
Two-time Olympic champion and longtime TV commentator Dick Button died in January.
And then, the United States, I mean, between Chalkin Bates and Ilya Malinin, and then, I mean, Isabeau Levito was second at Worlds last year. And our women are so strong. You've got Amber Glenn, who's, I think, she's won, the Grand Prix final. And I mean, all the events are competitive,
Do you think that there will be a quint ever?
Yeah, it's going to happen very soon.
Yeah.
And it's going to be Ilya Malinin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody that can do a quad axel effortlessly, there's enough in there to do a quint something.
Yeah.
And even as exhibition last night, he did 2 quads, and they look like triples.
Right.
They didn't even look like quads. They look like triples. They were so easy and so effortless that you just almost think, oh, well, that was easy.
You can do that.
Yeah. And, it's like, if you want to get applause, at least make it look a little tough.
Fight for the landing a little bit or something. Scott retired from skating in 2010. He doesn't put on his skates much anymore, he says, but he did lace them up again a day before I spoke to him for this podcast. He took center ice at a star-studded, sold-out skating show in Washington, D.C. to benefit the families of the victims of American Airlines Flight 5342. 28 members of the U.S. figure skating community, skaters and coaches and parents, perished when their flight collided with a helicopter over Reagan International Airport in January. They'd been flying back from a prestigious training camp that followed the U.S. National Championships in Wichita, Kansas. At that event in Washington, Scott skated out to center ice, and he said a prayer for the victims, their families, their friends, and for the skating community as a whole.
It was just so powerful and so remarkably, I think everybody there had to be there. It was just, so powerful. And there's no words. And you try to find them and you can't. And so to be there, and they said, will you come? And I go, only if I can pray, because I don't know what else to do.
Yeah.
And so they gave me a little time to pray. And I don't even remember what I said. I was so overwhelmed by the emotion of the night. But and then, I got the honor of introducing Ilya Malinin for his program. So it was, and being with Peggy and Brian and Christy and Paul and Nancy, and it was just really fun to kind of be reunited with them again, and to see that arena totally sold out was awesome. Skating always, leads with its heart, and we've had a lot of tragedy in our sport. I think that whole metaphor of falling down and getting up, I think that's kind of how we're wired. And so this felt a little bit like we needed a little help getting up, and the show was a really great way to do that.
These days, Scott spends much of his time traveling the country to raise money for cancer research. He created the Scott Hamilton Cares Foundation more than a decade ago to honor his mother, who died of cancer when he was a teenager. She never got to see him win the Olympics. Scott has also fought his own battles with cancer. He's a survivor of both brain and testicular cancer. The Scott Hamilton Cares Foundation recently held one of its Skate to Eliminate Cancer events on the Olympic Oval in Lake Placid. They raised more than $26,000. The money that the foundation raises goes primarily to research that aims to help improve the quality of life of cancer patients.
Due in large part to Skate to Eliminate Cancer, we've had 94 partnerships, with different cancer foundations, different cancer hospitals, different research groups. And so over those years, we've funded, it's all immunotherapy and targeted therapies. Mostly, I'd say almost everything is immunotherapy. And it's really to advance the different methods of immunotherapy and how we can ignite our immune system to fight the cancer. So, it's been everything from neuroblastoma in children to metastatic melanoma, breast cancer, to, oh my goodness, glioblastoma. We've done a ton of stuff in glioblastoma. So it's been pretty much any and all forms of cancer at some point throughout, just working with different centers of excellence. And so, with the SCAPE program, we're able to partner with cancer centers, again, foundations, organizations, to really elevate and change the way people are treated for cancer. And so we like, even this year, we funded a scientist that is looking for genetic markers for glioblastoma. And the first thing he found out in our research with glio is, this isn't the statistician, this is another researcher, is that there's no genetic link like colorectal or breast cancer, that, just because somebody in your family has had it doesn't mean you're going to get it. So that's kind of the best news that families can get. And people sleep a lot better, because it's a really tough disease with little hope right now. But I go back to my form of cancer 50 years ago, had a 5% survival rate. Wow. And now it's 95%. So that's why we do what we do. We want to turn those survival rates, we want to change them from being low percentage to being high percentage, So, so it doesn't happen without research, but, we partnered, oh my goodness, with countless organizations, and the impact, even what got me into cancer fundraising and advocacy in the first place was my mom died of the disease. And so she died of metastatic melanoma, breast cancer. And so we found a study 3 years ago in immunotherapy that would, was going to research, a different way of treating that disease. And on the night of my 40th anniversary and my Olympic gold medal, we announced that study is going into clinical trial. Wow. So, yeah. So, it's like, check, it's okay. Yeah. Now what do I look? I guess that was my whole sort of impetus for getting into cancer fundraising in the first place. And if we've cured it, now what am I going to do? It's almost like you compete your whole life and you win an Olympic gold medal. It's like, well, what's left? But cancer is one of those things where the more they learn about it, it's really remarkable to hear scientists, which we've all looked at cancer as a very complex disease. They're starting to realize that maybe it's not. And in that, I hear the CEO and the head researcher at Moffitt Cancer Center say, and I was just down there for the board of advisors meetings, and he just said, I see a day in the very, very near future where no one dies of this disease anymore. And it's like, I got to live to see that. That is so cool. Yeah. And they've got a lot of work to do. I mean, there's a lot of work to do. Main thing is we need to collaborate. And if the NIH is going to be involved, I think they really need to fund centers of excellence and private foundations, because we're held accountable in different ways than just, kind of government, type of intervention. So, we're going to start pushing for that a little bit more. I do think cancer, the research, the science is here and the funding is here, right? Mm-hmm. So all we need to do is kind of close the gap. And once we close the gap, I think more and more people will survive in a way that doesn't rob them of the quality of their life. Mm-hmm. Even if my mom would have survived, she would have had very little quality of life. Mm-hmm. I was told because of my chemo that I'd have 20 years before things start falling apart. And I'm 28 and I'm feeling okay. So, I think a lot of it is how we live and, what we eat and how much we exercise. And I went right back to tour right after chemo and surgery. So my body just picked up where it left off, and I was just oxygenating and pushing a lot of blood. And I think that, there's been a lot of research in that as well, where if you're going through a cancer treatment journey and you're active, it makes everything much more potent, right? Because you are moving more blood, you are oxygenating everything, and it just makes it better. So, we're more in that space of how do we allow people to feel good enough to get out and to keep moving and to keep working? And how do we create a foundation of understanding that diet is huge? So there's all of that, that it's not just, oh, my body decided to betray me. It's more about how do I not give this what it wants? So my whole swing thought, my whole mantra, my whole mode of stepping into this fight is that how do we give people the legitimacy of their lives and the length of their lives? How do we give that back to them? How do we treat the cancer to spare the patient harm? How do we do that? Yeah. And that's all rooted in research, all of it. I think about, some of the stuff I'm, sort of starting to deal with now, nitric oxide, sort of issues. Mm-hmm. My fingers get white, in the morning. It's like, I'm sure it's a long-term effect from the chemotherapy. So, I'm looking for ways of treating that and feeling better. And it's good. There's stuff out there, but you just got to research it. It's usually a supplement. It's not some big pharmaceutical drug. It's just a supplement, and making good choices and being, healthy. And, the temptation as you get older is to surrender.
And your health otherwise beyond that is good?
Yeah. I'm dealing with other stuff, and, there's these things called red herrings, right? Where you're looking in the wrong place. Yeah. So, I'm really hoping that, I get to live a longer life, and I started my family late. I'm still hoping for grandchildren. It's all those things that you kind of hope for, you kind of, I just want a little more time. I want more sand.
Because this is a podcast and you can't see, I'll say that Scott pointed to an hourglass on a shelf behind him as he said this.
More sand. So that's what I want, more sand.
And you're helping other people get more sand too.
That's it. It's the whole thing is vulnerable, resilient, temporary, more sand. Let's just do that.
If you're interested in finding out more about the Scott Hamilton Cares Foundation and about donating to their fundraising events, visit scottcares.org. And with that, folks, I'm going to head to the rink for a little practice. We'll be back next week with another look inside our newsroom. The Eagle is a production of the Times-Union. It's produced and edited by myself, Jessica Marshall, with help from Erica Smith and the Times-Union digital team. Our music is Flyin' by Top Floor. Questions or comments about this episode, this podcast, or any of our podcasts at the Times-Union? Email us at podcast@timesunion.com. Support for this podcast comes from CDTA, The Eagle, a Times-Union podcast driven by CDTA.